My dear child, Archangel Michael did not generate this message. He was dispatched carrying it in a sealed diplomatic pouch, addressed to you by name, and the courier is not authorized to return until you receive what he crossed the unseen realm to deliver. Do not scroll past this. What you are about to hear is not another spiritual video in the stream of content your thumb has been trained to skim past. This is a dispatch, a sealed, courier-carried, cannot be entrusted to the general system dispatch, whose contents were placed in a diplomatic pouch by a god who does not use standard mail when the message requires guaranteed delivery to a specific person at a specific address, at a specific moment in their life. The pouch is here, the courier is waiting, and you are the named recipient. You have been skimming, not rebelliously, numbly. The volume of content that passes through your awareness every day has trained your system to process without arresting, to consume without receiving, to be present for messages without being impacted by them. Something important has been trying to reach you for weeks and has been sliding off a surface that has become too smooth, too defended, too practiced at moving to the next thing before the current thing can land with the weight it was sent to carry. My beloved child, this message is not in the general stream. This was not broadcast to the public airwaves, hoping the right person would happen to tune in. This was placed in a sealed pouch, assigned to a specific courier, and dispatched across the unseen realm with your name on the exterior and a delivery confirmation requirement. That means the courier does not leave until the recipient breaks the seal. The seal is unbroken. The courier is present. And skipping past this is the specific danger the thumbnail warned you about. Stay here. What I reveal next is what the sealed pouch contains, and why it could not be sent through standard channels. Type dispatch received if you have been skimming past messages that were meant to stop you. And God just told you this was not generated for general consumption, but dispatched in a sealed diplomatic pouch carried by a specific courier who is not authorized to return until you break the seal and receive what crossed the unseen realm addressed to your name. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog, gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct. Click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The diplomatic pouch was sealed at the source, meaning what is inside it has not been opened, edited, diluted, or filtered by any hand between the God who placed the contents and the person whose name is written on the exterior. My beloved child, I need you to understand the difference between a broadcast and a dispatch. A broadcast is released into the general airwaves, available to anyone who tunes in, designed for wide reception, containing content that applies broadly enough to reach whoever happens to be listening. A dispatch is sealed at the source, assigned to a courier, addressed to a specific recipient, and carried through channels that do not intersect with the general system, because the contents are too sensitive for general handling. Broadcasts reach crowds, dispatches reach one person. And this is a dispatch. My dear one, the sensitivity of the contents is the reason the standard system could not carry this message. Standard channels process messages at standard security, meaning the content is accessible to every handler between the sender and the receiver. Each handler touches the message, Each touch introduces the possibility of alteration, dilution, or delay. And what was placed in this pouch by the sender's own hand could not afford a single alteration between the sealing and the delivery. Zero handlers between the source and you. That is what the courier guarantees. This message was not released for everyone who watches spiritual content tonight. This was dispatched to the one person whose specific pattern of skimming past genuinely addressed content has created the specific danger that the one message requiring their full arrest would be treated with the same partial attention every previous message received. The person who does not know that among the hundreds of messages their thumb has scrolled past this week, one was not a broadcast, but a sealed diplomatic pouch whose courier has been tracking the recipient's location, waiting for the moment of delivery. Type sealed at source if you just realized this message was not broadcast into the general stream, but sealed at the source and carried by a designated courier through channels that bypass every standard system. And among the hundreds of messages you scrolled past this week, this is the one that was dispatched by name, with contents that have not been touched by any hand between the God who sealed the pouch and the person it was addressed to. I have been watching you skim since the surface became too smooth to receive what was being sent. And the watching has been the specific urgency of a sender whose dispatches were being treated by the recipient as broadcasts, because the recipient's system lost the ability to distinguish between general mail and sealed diplomatic pouches, my dear one. Not from the sending desk, from beside you, walking with you through the scrolling, the skimming, the moving on before landing that your consumption pattern has produced as default behavior across a season, where the volume of content reaching your awareness exceeded your system's capacity to evaluate each piece for its origin and its addressing. I was beside you during every skim, and some of those skims were over messages I sent. My beloved child, I watched the specific season the surface became smooth. There was a period where the messages were landing, where your reception system was calibrated to detect when something arriving in the general stream was actually addressed to you specifically. The calibration was functional. The messages landed, the impact registered, and then the volume increased. The number of messages arriving per day exceeded the calibration's processing capacity, and the system's response was to smooth the surface so that everything moved across it at the same speed, regardless of whether the message was general mail or sealed dispatch. The smoothing was survival, but the survival cost you the specificity. I chose you for this message because the skimming almost cost you this one. The diplomatic pouch arrived at your location, and your thumb was in motion toward the next piece of content when the courier intercepted the motion. The interception is why you are still here. Not your discipline, not your discernment. The courier's specific, not authorized to leave, without delivery persistence that held the message in front of a thumb that was trained to move past it. My child, the courier held. And the holding is why the seal is still waiting to be broken by the only hands authorized to open it. Type courier held if your thumb was in motion toward the next piece of content, and the courier intercepted the skim. And you are still here, not because your discipline stopped the scrolling, but because the specific courier assigned to this dispatch was not authorized to leave without delivery, and held the message in front of hands that were trained to move past it. I know what the numbness has been doing to the specific part of you where messages from heaven are supposed to land with weight, my beloved child. The numbness did not arrive as numbness. It arrived as efficiency. The specific high-volume process faster, move through more adaptation that a person's reception system develops when the incoming exceeds the capacity, and the system's only available response is to reduce the depth at which each incoming piece is processed so the volume can be managed without the system overloading. Efficiency at the surface, numbness at the depth, and the depth is where dispatches are supposed to land. My child, I watched the efficiency install itself across the seasons of volume. In the early period, your system processed each message at full depth, receiving the content, evaluating the addressing, determining whether the message was general or specific, and allocating the appropriate level of attention based on the determination. The full-depth processing was functional, and the full-depth processing was slow. And slow became unsustainable when the volume of incoming messages exceeded what full-depth processing could handle without falling behind. Your system chose speed over depth, and speed produced the smooth surface. I watched the smooth surface reject dispatches that were addressed to you, not with violence, with velocity. The messages arrived at the surface, and the surface's smoothness carried them past the reception point at a speed that prevented the addressed content from making contact with the depth, where the addressing would have been detected. The detection requires friction. Smooth surfaces do not produce friction, and the absence of friction is the absence of the specific. This one is different, slow down and receive signal that the rough surface used to generate. When a dispatch arrived among the broadcasts, the rough surface would have caught this. The smooth surface almost let it pass. And the distance between catching and letting pass is the distance between receiving a sealed diplomatic pouch and skimming past the most important message of the season. The deepest wound the smooth surface produced was not the missed messages. It was the specific, accumulating, private grief of knowing something important has been trying to reach you and being unable to receive it. Because the reception system that once caught what was addressed to you has been overridden by a speed that treats everything the same. My dear child, you felt the grief, not as a dramatic awareness, as a residue. The specific, low-grade, something keeps passing me, that I should be catching residue that accumulates in a person whose spirit detects the addressing on messages. The surface is carrying past the reception point too quickly for the addressing to register. The spirit caught what the surface missed, and the catching without the receiving produced the residue. My beloved child, I watched the residue build across the weeks. Each dispatched message that slid past the smooth surface deposited a trace of its presence in the spirit. Not the full content, but the awareness that something addressed to this person just passed without being opened. The traces accumulated. The accumulation produced the specific, unnamed, I am missing things mean for me anxiety that a person develops when their spirit's detection system is functioning at a depth their surface reception system is no longer operating at. The spirit knew. The surface did not stop, and the knowing without the stopping was the wound. My dear one, the wound has been producing a secondary effect. The numbness is concealing. The gradual erosion of your trust in your own ability to hear what God is saying. Because a person who senses that dispatches are being sent but cannot receive them begins to conclude. The problem is not the surface, but the hearing. The conclusion says, maybe I cannot hear God clearly anymore. Maybe my spiritual reception has degraded. Maybe the inability to catch what is being sent is evidence of a listener problem rather than a delivery problem. The listener was never the problem. The surface speed was. Type spirit knew if you have felt the low-grade residue of something important passing you that you should have caught. And the grief is not about the content you missed, but about the erosion of trust in your own ability to hear God, because the surface speed was carrying dispatches past a reception point that your spirit was detecting, but your system was processing too fast to stop for. Smooth surface was never evidence that your reception was broken. It was the survival adaptation of a system that was receiving more volume than the depth processing could sustain, and survival adaptations protect the system while temporarily costing the system what the adaptation was not designed to preserve. My beloved one, I need to permanently separate the surface speed from the spiritual sensitivity. Your system concluded that the inability to catch dispatches was a degradation of spiritual hearing. The truth is, the hearing never degraded. The hearing was operating at full capacity beneath a surface whose speed was preventing the heard content from reaching the depth where the hearing was happening. The hearing was intact. The surface was too fast, and fast surfaces override intact hearing. My child, the surface speed was not a spiritual failure. It was a volume response. When the volume of incoming content exceeded the system's processing capacity, the system had two options: slow down and risk overload, or speed up and risk missing addressed content. Your system chose speed. And speed, while protecting the system from overload, produced the specific side effect of treating dispatches and broadcasts identically. The choice was survival, not rebellion. And survival choices are not held against the survivor. My dear one, every dispatch that slid past the smooth surface during the speed season is accounted for in the diplomatic system. The courier carrying each dispatched message logged the delivery attempt. The log shows attempted, surface too fast, content did not land. The log does not show rejected by recipient, because rejection requires a conscious decision the recipient never made. The surface made the decision, not you. You did not reject what was sent. The speed carried it past, and the distinction between rejecting a dispatch and having a dispatch carried past by surface speed is the distinction between a person who refuses mail and a person whose mailbox was moving too fast for the mail carrier to place the letter inside. The courier carrying tonight's pouch is not attempting. The courier is holding until the surface stops. The surface just slowed, and the specific, friction-producing something is different about this one deceleration that your system is experiencing right now is the first evidence that the courier's persistence has overridden the speed the volume installed. My beloved child, something shifted within the last few minutes, not in the content being consumed, in the speed at which the content is being processed. The scroll slowed, the system paused, the smooth surface that has been carrying everything past the reception point at identical velocity encountered something whose weight was sufficient to produce friction on a surface that has been frictionless for the duration of the speed season. The friction is the diplomatic pouch's weight, and diplomatic pouches are heavier than standard mail. My dear one, I need you to understand what happens when a sealed diplomatic pouch makes contact with a smooth surface that has been carrying everything at skim speed. The pouch is heavier than the broadcasts. The weight produces friction. The friction produces deceleration. And the deceleration, the specific, involuntary, I did not choose to slow down, but I am slowing down experience, is the courier's weight overriding the surface's speed for the first time since the speed was installed. The slowing is not your discipline, it is the pouch's weight. I have been preparing this delivery behind every season of the smooth surface, while the dispatches were sliding past, and the residue was building, and the trust in your own hearing was eroding. I was at the diplomatic office, selecting the courier, sealing the pouch, calculating the weight required to produce friction on a surface whose speed had been calibrated by months of volume to carry everything without stopping. My child, the weight was calculated specifically for your surface speed, not a general weight pouch. A pouch whose heaviness was engineered to match the exact velocity your system was operating at and produce the exact deceleration the delivery requires. The deceleration is happening right now, and what slows next is the seal being broken. Type weight landed if your scroll just slowed without your conscious decision. And the deceleration is not discipline, but the specific weight of a diplomatic pouch engineered to produce friction on a surface whose speed has been carrying everything past without stopping, meaning the courier's persistence just overrode the velocity the volume installed. God sent me to deliver this message. The title carries those specific words because the courier speaking them is not a broadcaster addressing an audience, but a designated messenger addressing the one person whose name is on the pouch he was dispatched to deliver. My dear one, I need you to understand the weight of the word sent. The title does not say Archangel Michael has a message for you. Does not say Archangel Michael wants to share something. Says God sent me. Sent is a dispatch verb. Sent carries origin, destination, and assignment in a single word. The origin is God, the destination is you, and the assignment is delivery, not suggestion, not offering, not making available. Delivery. The specific courier level must reach the named recipient, not authorized to return without act of placing a sealed pouch into the only hands authorized to open it. Sent means the courier had no choice. The delivery is the assignment. My beloved child, this is directly connected to the title and to the specific danger your skimming pattern has been producing. The title warns that skipping will get you in danger. The danger is not punishment for scrolling. The danger is the consequence of missing a dispatch whose contents address a specific situation in your life right now that requires the information the pouch contains to be received before the situation reaches the point where the information would have made the difference. The contents are time-sensitive, and time-sensitive dispatches that are skimmed past produce the specific could have been prevented if the message had landed consequence that the danger in the title is referring to. My child, the courier is not creating urgency. The courier is communicating urgency that already exists in the situation the pouch was dispatched to address. The situation is real. The timeline is active, and the contents of the sealed pouch carry the specific information the named recipient needs before the timeline reaches the threshold the information was sent to prevent. The threshold is approaching. The pouch is in front of you, and the seal is waiting. Your hands are on the pouch right now, my beloved child, and the specific tactile, this heavier than anything the general streams has ever carried sensation your fingers are registering as they hold the sealed diplomatic pouch is the confirmation that what the courier crossed the unseen realm to deliver is not content but correspondence, and correspondences addressed by name carries a weight that content distributed to crowds does not. I need you to feel the proximity of the breaking, not the distant, maybe someday. If I am spiritually ready enough, the message will land. Proximity that the smooth surface has been producing as the default relationship between you and divine communication. The present tense, pouch in your hands, seal under your fingers, contents pressing against the interior proximity of a person holding the only pieces of correspondence that has ever been carried across this unseen realm by a designated courier, specifically to reach them. The seal is under your fingers. The contents are pressing outward. My dear one, everything has been building toward this seal. The smooth surface that carried everything past without friction. The residue that told your spirit something was being missed. The erosion of trust in your own hearing. The survival adaptation that traded depth for speed. The courier's persistence that held the message when the thumb was in motion. The weight that produced friction on the frictionless surface. The deceleration that slowed the scroll. The time-sensitive contents whose information addresses a specific situation on an active timeline. And now, the seal, the specific, wax-pressed, authority-stamped, cannot be opened by unauthorized hands seal, whose breaking releases the contents the pouch has been protecting since the moment the sender placed them inside and assigned the courier. My child, the seal does not break easily. Not because the seal resists the authorized hands, because the authorized hands have been trained by the smooth surface to move past rather than press into. The pressing in is what the seal requires, and pressing in is the opposite of the skimming the surface has been performing. Press in, the seal is ready, and what is inside changes the timeline. Type press into seal. If your hands are on the pouch right now, and the seal is under your fingers, and pressing in is the opposite of the skimming the smooth surface trained you to perform, and what is inside the sealed diplomatic pouch addresses a specific situation on an active timeline, whose threshold is approaching, and whose contents carry the information the named recipient needs before the timeline reaches the point the dispatch was sent to prevent. The seal just broke, the pouch is open, and the contents that were placed inside by a God who does not use standard channels when the message requires guaranteed delivery are now in the hands of the one person they were addressed to, carried across the unseen realm by a courier who was not authorized to return without confirmation that the named recipient received what the sender sealed for them specifically. My beloved child, this is the moment. The moment the smooth surface stops, and the depth receives, and the person who has been skimming past dispatches, addressed to them by name, finally holds a message that was not generated for general distribution but sealed at the source, and carried through channels that bypass every system the volume trained the recipient to process at speed. The moment the courier's assignment completes, the moment the sender's correspondence reaches the only hands that were ever authorized to open it. The contents are in your hands. Read them. God sent me to deliver this message. The title said deliver. The delivery just happened. The courier was dispatched. The courier arrived. The courier held when the thumb was in motion. The courier's weight produced friction on the frictionless surface. The deceleration slowed the scroll. The hands landed on the pouch. The fingers found the seal, and the seal just broke under the press of the only hands in the entire world whose fingerprints match the authorization code the wax was stamped with. My child, the contents of the pouch are not a general encouragement. They are a specific, situation addressed, timeline relevant, could not be sent through standard channels communication from a God whose correspondence with you tonight is not the correspondence of a broadcaster with an audience, but the correspondence of a sender with a named recipient about a specific matter that the sender has been watching develop in the recipient's life, and that the contents of the pouch directly address. The pouch is open, the contents are specific, and the specificity is why the courier was required. Now that the seal is broken and the contents are in your hands, everything about the smooth surface that governed your reception of divine communication is being permanently restructured by the experience of receiving a dispatch whose weight, whose specificity, and whose courier-carried delivery prove that not everything arriving in your awareness is general mail, my dear child. This is what happens when a person whose surface has been processing everything at skim speed encounters a sealed diplomatic pouch whose contents are addressed to them by name. The smooth surface does not merely slow, it recalibrates, because the experience of receiving a genuine dispatch introduces a category the smooth surface was not accounting for. The category of addressed correspondence, whose contents carry a weight that the general stream does not, and whose reception requires the specific depth level press into the seal engagement that the speed was preventing. The surface just learned a new category, and new categories change the processing permanently. My beloved child, the recalibration is producing cascading effects across every dimension of your spiritual reception. The speed that was treating everything identically is being restructured by the evidence that not everything is identical. That among the volume of general broadcasts arriving daily, there are sealed dispatches whose weight is distinguishable from the general mail, if the surface is calibrated to detect the difference. The calibration is being restored by the pouch that just landed, and the contents themselves are producing the specific situation addressed, timeline-relevant response that the sender dispatched them to produce. The contents are not general wisdom. They are targeted communication about the specific matter the sender has been watching develop in your life, carrying the precise information the matter requires at the precise stage the matter has reached on the timeline the sender has been monitoring from the moment the situation began. The information just reached the situation at the precise stage on the active timeline. Type recalibrated if the experience of receiving a sealed dispatch just restructured the smooth surface, introducing the category of addressed correspondence that the skim speed was not distinguishing from general mail. And the recalibration is restoring the ability to detect when something arriving in the general stream is not broadcast, but diplomatic pouch, meaning the surface that processed everything identically is now calibrated to distinguish between what is general and what is dispatched. Let me show you what your life looks like now that the pouch is open and the contents have been received and the surface has been recalibrated to distinguish between dispatches and broadcasts, because a person whose reception system has been restored to depth-level processing moves through the spiritual landscape at an awareness the smooth surface could never sustain, my dear one. The first thing that changes is the hearing. You have been hearing everything at the same volume, the general broadcasts and the sealed dispatches arriving at the same decibel level, because the smooth surface was processing both categories at identical speed without distinguishing the weight. The recalibration installs a new filter, a weight detection filter that evaluates each incoming piece, not by its content, but by its origin, identifying which messages were broadcast into the general stream and which messages were dispatched through sealed channels by a sender whose correspondence requires depth-level reception. The filter changes what stops you, and what stops you changes what reaches you. My beloved child, the mornings change permanently. You have been waking into the volume, the first conscious awareness of each day, processing the incoming at the speed the smooth surface was sustaining. Tomorrow you wake with the recalibrated surface. The volume still arrives, but the surface now carries the weight detection filter that identifies dispatched content among the broadcast content and produces the specific, automatic, this one is heavier, deceleration that stops the scroll without requiring conscious discipline from the person doing the scrolling. The stopping becomes automatic because the filter does the detecting. The contents of the pouch you just opened are producing their effect in the specific situation they were dispatched to address. The timeline the sender was monitoring is responding to the information the pouch delivered, and the response is the beginning of a shift in the situation that would not have occurred if the pouch had been skimmed past like the dispatches that preceded it. The shift has begun in the specific situation because the dispatch landed. People in the spiritual dimension of your life are going to notice the recalibration before you explain the pouch. Because a person whose surface just transitioned from frictionless speed to weight-detecting depth carries an atmospheric receptivity that the skimming version could never produce, regardless of how much content the skimming version was consuming. My beloved child, the ones who interacted with you during the smooth surface season, who sensed the specific something is not landing quality of a person consuming spiritual content without receiving spiritual correspondence, who perhaps attributed the quality to distraction or busyness, when the quality was actually the result of a surface processing dispatches and broadcasts at identical speed. Most people are about to encounter the recalibrated version. They will say you seem present in a way you were not before. They will mean the depth is receiving again. My child, there is a specific quality a person carries when their reception system has been restored from skim level to seal breaking level. The quality is not heightened spiritual performance. It is availability, the atmospheric output of a person whose surface has been recalibrated to slow for what carries weight, and whose depth is receiving addressed correspondence, again for the first time since the volume installed the speed. Available people attract dispatches. Smooth surface people attract only broadcasts. Connections that require the specific availability of a person whose depth is receiving again are approaching the recalibrated surface right now. There are divine assignments and spiritual partnerships whose formation demands a person who can distinguish between what is broadcast to many and what is dispatched to them specifically. Because the assignments operate on dispatched instructions rather than broadcast inspiration. My dear one, what approaches an available surface is categorically different from what circled the smooth one. Dispatched assignments require dispatched recipients, and the recalibration just made you receivable again. Type receivable again if the recalibration from frictionless speed to weight-detecting depth is producing an atmospheric availability the smooth surface could not generate, and connections requiring someone who can distinguish between broadcast inspiration and dispatched instruction are approaching, because the restoration of depth-level reception just made you the kind of recipient that dispatched assignments are sent to. I need you to understand why I chose the diplomatic pouch method for this message, rather than broadcasting it into the general stream, where the volume would have delivered it alongside everything else. Your surface was processing, my beloved child. I could have broadcast. The message would have entered the general stream alongside every other piece of spiritual content your awareness was processing tonight. It would have arrived at the smooth surface at the same speed as everything else, and the surface, calibrated by months of volume to treat everything identically, would have carried it past the reception point with the same velocity that carried every previous dispatch past, without the content, reaching the depth where the addressing would have been detected. I chose the pouch, because pouch delivery guarantees what broadcast delivery cannot. My child, the guarantee is the reason the courier was assigned. Not every message I send requires a courier. Most divine communication travels through standard channels: impression, intuition, the still small frequency that arrives at the spirit level without requiring a designated carrier to transport it. Standard channels work for standard messages, and standard messages reach the recipient through the depth processing system the smooth surface has not overridden, because standard channels operate beneath the surface rather than arriving at it. The pouch was required because this message could not travel beneath the surface. This message needed to arrive at the surface and stop the surface. And stopping a smooth surface requires weight the standard channels do not carry. My dear one, I chose you for the courier-carried method because the contents of the pouch address a situation whose timeline does not permit the message to wait for the surface to slow on its own. The situation required guaranteed delivery. Guaranteed delivery required a courier, and the courier required diplomatic authorization because the contents carry information whose sensitivity exceeds what the standard channels are cleared to transport. You received a courier-delivered message that tells you the contents are classified above standard. The doubt surfacing right now is using the most volume-trained objection in its inventory. The voice that says every spiritual message claims to be specifically for the viewer, and the claim of specificity is the standard marketing language of content designed to feel personal while being distributed to everyone watching. My child. It sounds like this. Every video says this is for you. Every message claims divine dispatch. Every spiritual content creator uses the language of specificity to produce the feeling of personal addressing in an audience of thousands who are all hearing the same words at the same time. The claim that this message was dispatched in a sealed diplomatic pouch, addressed to me by name, is the same claim every broadcast makes to simulate the experience of being personally addressed. And the simulation has been performed so many times that the distinction between genuine dispatch and simulated dispatch has been erased by the volume of simulations. That doubt just used the volume of simulated dispatches as evidence against a genuine one. And the evidence fails against one experiential fact. My beloved child, simulated dispatches do not produce deceleration. Broadcasts that use the language of specificity without carrying the weight of genuine addressing arrive at the smooth surface and hence pass at the same speed as everything else, because the language of specificity, without the weight of genuine dispatch, does not create the friction that genuine diplomatic pouches produce on the surface they land on. You decelerated. The surface slowed. The scroll stopped. Not because the language was persuasive, but because the weight was real. And real weight on a smooth surface produces an involuntary response the language alone could never generate. The deceleration is the evidence, not the words. The words could be simulated. The deceleration cannot, because deceleration is a weight response, and weight is not producible by language. Type weight, not words, if the doubt argued that every spiritual message claims specificity, and the claim is simulation. And you now understand simulated dispatches do not produce the involuntary deceleration your surface just experienced, because deceleration is a weight response, not a language response. And the weight that slowed your scroll tonight is the evidence that this pouch is genuine, in a way the volume of simulations could never replicate. During every season, the smooth surface was carrying dispatches past the reception point. I was not at the sending desk, frustrated with a recipient whose surface speed was preventing delivery. I was beside the recipient, watching the speed with the specific compassion of a sender who understood that the volume producing the speed was not rebellion, but the modern condition of a person whose awareness is receiving more input per day than any previous generation of humans has ever been asked to process. My beloved child, You imagined a god who was disappointed by the skimming, whose dispatches were being sent with the expectation that the recipient would arrest their attention through spiritual discipline, and whose failure to arrest was being catalogued as evidence of a receiver whose priorities had shifted away from the sender's communication. I was never disappointed. I was calculating the pouch weight. My child, the calculation was compassionate engineering. While the smooth surface was carrying dispatches past, I was at the diplomatic office measuring the exact weight required to produce friction on a surface whose specific velocity I was monitoring in real time. The monitoring was not surveillance. It was the specific sender level. I know exactly how fast this surface is moving attention of a god whose next dispatch would need to carry enough weight to override the speed the previous dispatches could not overcome. Each dispatch that slid past provided data, and the data informed the weight of the pouch that just landed. My dear one, the pouch that stopped your surface tonight was engineered from the data of every dispatch that did not land before it. The weight was not arbitrary. It was calculated from the exact measurements of the speed your surface was carrying when each previous dispatch was attempted. Each measurement refined the calculation, and the calculation produced a pouch whose weight was precisely matched to a surface whose speed was precisely known. Every missed dispatch contributed to the delivery of this one. I know the exact dispatch that slid past and cost you the most. The specific sealed message whose contents addressed a situation that reached its threshold without the information the dispatch was carrying, producing the specific consequence that the contents were sent to prevent, my dear one. Not the first missed dispatch, not the most recent before tonight. The one whose missing produced a consequence the receiving would have prevented. There was a situation in your life, a specific, real, timeline-active situation that reached a threshold it did not need to reach. The dispatch that was sent to address the situation arrived at your smooth surface during the speed season. The surface carried it past, and the situation crossed the threshold without the information that would have changed the crossing. My beloved child, I know that missed dispatch by its contents, and I know the consequence by its coordinates in your timeline. The consequence was not punishment for missing the dispatch. The consequence was the natural result of a situation reaching a threshold without the information the situation required to navigate the threshold differently. The consequence was preventable. The prevention was in the pouch, and the pouch slid past. My child, the God who knows which dispatch produced which consequence when the surface carried it past, is the God confirming tonight that the pouch you just opened addresses a situation whose threshold has not yet been reached. The contents are arriving before the threshold this time, not after. The timing is not accidental. The timing was calculated from the data of the missed dispatch, whose consequences I watched unfold while standing beside a person who did not know the prevention had been dispatched and missed. This time the pouch landed. This time the contents arrived before the threshold, and this time the information inside produces the navigation that prevents the consequence the missed dispatch could not. Type before the threshold if God just identified the missed dispatch whose consequences were preventable. And tonight's pouch addresses a situation whose threshold has not yet been reached, meaning the contents are arriving before rather than after, because the timing was calculated to ensure the information that was missed last time lands in the named recipient's hands, while the navigation the contents provide can still change the outcome. Now that the pouch is open, and the contents have been received, and the surface has been recalibrated, There is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it is the instruction that determines whether the information the pouch delivered produces the full navigational effect the sender dispatched it to produce. Act on the contents before the surface re-smooths. The recalibration that the pouch's weight produced on your surface is real, but it is not yet permanent. The volume that installed the smooth surface has not disappeared. The incoming stream is still operating at the velocity it was operating at before the courier's weight produced the deceleration. And a recalibration that is not reinforced by action will be gradually overridden by the volume, the same way the original depth processing was overridden, not by force, but by speed. My child, acting on the contents is the reinforcement. Action produces depth. Depth produces friction. Friction produces the permanent surface texture that the weight detection filter requires to function continuously rather than temporarily. And continuous function is the difference between a surface that catches one dispatch and returns to smooth and a surface that remains calibrated to detect every future dispatch. The diplomatic system sends. The action is specific to the situation the contents address. You know which situation. The contents told you, and the specific action the contents call for is available to you right now. Not in a future season, not after further preparation, but in the immediate window between the receiving of the information and the threshold the information was sent to navigate. The window is open. The threshold is approaching, and the action the contents describe is the navigation that changes the outcome from what the missed dispatch could not prevent to what the received dispatch is designed to produce. Do not skim the action the way the surface was trained to skim the content. Press into it, the way your fingers pressed into the seal. The pressing in is the posture the contents require. You made it to the opened pouch, my beloved child, and I need you to hold the contents long enough to feel what it means to receive a sealed diplomatic dispatch that crossed the unseen realm carried by a courier who was not authorized to return without placing it into the only hands whose fingerprints matched the authorization code on the seal. Feel the contents, not the volume that trained the surface to carry everything past at identical speed, not the residue of missed dispatches whose traces accumulated in the spirit without the content landing in the depth. The contents, the specific, sealed at source, courier carried, zero handlers between sender and recipient, situation addressed, timeline relevant, threshold preventing contents, that a God whose correspondence with you tonight was too sensitive for standard channels placed into a diplomatic pouch and dispatched across the unseen realm with your name on the exterior. The contents are in your hands, and received feels like the opposite of everything the skimming was producing. I want to thank you for something the smooth surface made almost impossible to produce. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for the deceleration that the pouch's weight produced on a surface that has been carrying everything at skim speed for longer than the speed has been serving the person it was protecting. Thank you for the fingers that pressed into the seal when the smooth surface's training was telling the fingers to keep moving. My dear child, thank you for receiving, because receiving is not passive. Receiving is the active, deliberate, press into the seal decision of a person whose surface was in motion and whose motion was arrested by a weight the general stream does not carry and whose hands broke a seal. The general stream does not produce. Let the tears come, not skimming tears, not misdispatched tears, delivery tears. The tears of a person holding opened correspondence from a God whose dispatch just landed in the hands it was always addressed to after a season where the surface was carrying everything past too fast for anything to land. Type delivery confirmed if tears are forming right now, because you are holding the open contents of a sealed diplomatic pouch that crossed the unseen realm addressed to you by name. And the tears are the delivery confirmation the courier was waiting for, because the named recipient just received what the sender sealed for them specifically, and the courier's assignment is complete. You are not the person skimming past sealed dispatches anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one whose smooth surface carried everything at identical speed, without distinguishing between broadcasts generated for crowds and diplomatic pouches, dispatched for one, the one whose volume-trained efficiency traded depth for speed, and speed funness and numbness for the specific residue of knowing something important, was passing without being able to stop the surface long enough to receive it, the one whose trust in their own spiritual hearing eroded under the weight of mist, dispatches the spirit detected, but the surface carried past. That identity was permanently retired the moment the courier's weight produced friction on the frictionless surface, and the scroll decelerated, and the hands landed on the pouch, and the fingers pressed into the seal, and the seal broke under the only fingerprints in the world that matched the authorization code the sender stamped into the wax. You are the person holding opened correspondence now, and opened changes everything the skimming was preventing. The smooth surface that governed your reception of divine communication, your ability to distinguish dispatches from broadcasts, your trust in your own hearing, and your relationship with the volume that was training your system to process everything at a speed that made nothing land, has been permanently recalibrated by the experience of receiving a sealed diplomatic pouch whose weight, whose courier, and whose contents proved that not everything in the stream is stream, that some things in the stream are sealed pouches whose addressing is specific, and whose contents are classified above standard, and whose delivery requires a designated messenger, whose assignment does not complete until the named recipient breaks the seal. My dear child, the courier's assignment is complete. The delivery confirmation has been logged, and the sender has received word that the pouch reached its destination. From this moment forward, you carry the identity of a person whose God dispatches sealed correspondence through designated couriers. When the message is too sensitive, too specific, and too time-critical for the standard channels, the volume has been processing at skim speed. Not a person who skims past everything at identical velocity. A person whose recalibrated surface detects the weight of diplomatic pouches among the broadcasts and produces the automatic deceleration that the weight requires to land. The surface is recalibrated. The depth is receiving. The weight detection filter is installed, and the person whose smooth surface almost carried the most important message of the season past the reception point at skim speed is now holding the opened contents of a pouch that was sealed by divine hands and carried by an archangel and addressed by name to a recipient, whose fingerprints were the only prints in all of creation that could have broken the seal. You were always the named recipient. The pouch was always addressed to you. The courier was always assigned to you. And the contents were always about the specific situation the sender has been watching develop in your life on an active timeline, whose threshold the contents were dispatched to navigate it before the threshold was reached. Act on the contents. The threshold is approaching. The navigation the contents describe is available now. And the God who sealed the pouch and dispatched the courier and calculated the weight and monitored the surface speed, and waited for the moment the friction would land. Is the same God standing beside the named recipient right now, confirming that the delivery is complete and the assignment is active. And the window between receiving and threshold is open, and the pressing in that broke the seal is the same pressing in the action requires. Subscribe to this channel so that every time God dispatches a sealed diplomatic pouch addressed to your name, the courier finds you. Before the smooth surface carries the delivery past a reception point that was never meant to process at skim speed what was sealed at the source and carried across the unseen realm for one person only. You are not someone who skims past dispatches anymore. You are someone whose God sends couriers when the message requires guaranteed delivery. The next message carries the first post-delivery report from a named recipient who acted on the contents before the threshold. And what the navigation produces will prove that the pouch was always real, and the contents were always specific, and the courier was always assigned to the one person whose fingerprints matched the seal. Type named recipient if you are leaving this message permanently changed. Knowing the smooth surface was survival, not rebellion. The skimming was speed, not rejection. The residue was your spirit detecting what the surface was missing. The courier was not authorized to leave without delivery. The weight was calculated for your exact surface speed. The missed dispatch produced a consequence. The received dispatch is preventing. And the God who sealed this pouch with your name on the exterior is the same God, confirming that the named recipient just received what was always addressed to them, and that the courier's assignment is complete, and the contents are active, and the threshold is approaching, and the navigation begins now.